Your Views, My Facts, begins in 3, 2, 1. Welcome everybody to Your Views and My Facts. I am Thomas John. I will be your host for this podcast today. We're going to be discussing the recent debate between Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz that was recently aired on CNN with one of their debate tonight episodes that they've been doing frequently here. To help us along, we've got one of our Vipers. If you're not familiar with the Viper, that's our very important podcaster. So we've got Rich in the studio. Rich, what's up?
What's going on, TJ?
Living my life, man.
I know it.
I've just been trying to survive and make this thing happen. So
You seem to be doing a pretty good job.
I think we're doing okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you're essentially my co-host.
Yeah, at this point, I would say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, which I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, I have fun.
You know, I was talking with my dad the other day, and he had asked me if I've been getting release forms from all you motherfuckers, like, that I can put on here. So can you just state for the record that you're okay with any time that you're in this podcast studio that I can utilize anything that's recorded?
He's so clever and wanted to make sure I couldn't sue your ass. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, of course.
But don't worry, I'll actually get a paper form and sign it off.
Yeah, I mean, verbal agreements work in most court of law, but you should definitely get a written one.
Well, one would think, which is what I told my dad. Look, I get having the actual written piece, but you would think that the fact that you are on the microphone speaking and it's being recorded, that you're giving
consenting.
It's implied consent. But anyways, yeah, my dad's like, better get into writing.
I mean, there's no video. I could be like tied up and you could be forcing me to do this.
That's true. It wouldn't be the first time you've been tied up. So anyways, I would just like to state then that we still have our first supporting advertiser, Lasting Lips by Leanne. There's a promotion going on our Facebook page, so find us at Views and Facts. And if you order a product, a lip sense product from Leanne, who runs the Lasting Lips by Leanne page, you mention Views and Facts, you'll be thrown into a special drawing to win additional products from her at no cost. So by all means, find us on Facebook at Views and Facts. Like her page, buy some products. They're great at an affordable value, and get it on that. And we're going to try to continue bringing bigger and better deals, as well as hopefully here soon getting some additional advertisers. I'm trying to work a few things on the side to make that happen. So, anywho, let's get right into it. The debate. Rich, what were your thoughts about it just right from the get-go?
Well, I think the big thing for me is I understand why they're doing the debate, right? Because you do have a large group of the Republican Party, Democratic Party, or just independent voters that want to hear about the particular issues, and they're not going to get that from the news media. The news media is not putting out anything substantial that you actually want to hear, and everything from the news media is going to be very agenda-driven. So at least in a debate, you're getting two congressional members, in this case, two members of the Senate, that are debating in the Senate, so might as well debate in a town hall format.
Right.
And town hall formats are very much historically American to begin with anyway, so I do like those aspects to it. I guess internally, I don't really understand why it's Bernie Sanders on the opposite side of Ted Cruz debating it. If I was a member of the GOP, I'd probably tell him not to continue debating Bernie because you're keeping this old bastard relevant when he doesn't need to be.
Well, they're just trying to give him the elixir of life.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of like that old uncle of yours where you're like, he's not that bad of a dude, so you're going to like listen to him and you're going to let him rant. But in the end, you're like, yeah, this is all old shit to begin with, and we're not really going to pay attention.
Well, perhaps it's one of the scheduling issues, because this hasn't been the first debate that they've done. Like, I mean, they've had a series, so they've had...
I think this is debate 2 of their series. So the first one was healthcare they did. Or this might even have been debate 3, but I know the first one was about healthcare. And Cruz didn't really specify what he would do on his plan per se, but he just explained why the ACA is not working.
But I thought recently, like, Marco Rubio was on one of them.
I didn't see one. I mean, I've seen Marco on the. He's currently stomping around talking about the tax reform that the GOP is putting out as well. But his is based on he's pushing for the child care tax, which ideally will give more deductions to those that have children, which a lot on both sides of the aisle can agree upon. As far as if you have a traditional household and you have children, you may be entitled to more of a tax benefit than those that do not have kids.
Well, maybe I was watching something else. It could have been another forum maybe that some of that Anderson Cooper was running. I thought it was on CNN, but either or doesn't really matter, because what we're going to talk about is the debate that just recently happened of a new tax plan between, again, Ted Cruz from Texas and Bernie Sanders from Vermont. So full disclosure, I was flipping through some other channels when that debate was going on, so I was able to catch pieces of it. I think I'll be able to help kind of drive some questions to try to probe you so you can educate our listening audience. But the main thing I was focused on that night was the final of BattleBots.
Yeah, I mean, true competition, the truest form.
Right. I got to see where I'm going to stand in the next 20 years when these robots are running everything.
I mean, it's just a matter of time with artificial intelligence and the fact that we can't catch up to it. Eventually, the robots are going to be the slave owners and we're the slaves.
What I learned is that I need either a spinning disc or a spinning drum, and that's the best thing to combat these things.
I'm just going to say everybody should have super soakers, because I don't think the electronics will be able to take on water, especially if it's like seawater. Seawater is like the deadliest. It's like using that's instead of using Full Metal Jackets, that's like using hollow pointed bullets, you know?
All right, fair enough. I really haven't thought about it that way. So when you're going to need to forage in the wilderness during these times, it'll be doing it when it's raining. That way they won't be out and about.
Exactly. In California, you're screwed, though, because we don't get much rain to begin with.
Oh, this is stupid talk, man. It's entertaining to me, though. But the parts that I did see, and I mentioned this to you before, but I thought there was good back and forth banter between those two, even though I do not care a lick for Bernie Sanders because he is so far on the left-hand spectrum that he is on another scale, and of course we're going to get into that. But there were funny moments, and one of the ones that sticks out in my mind was when Bernie had interrupted Ted Cruz. And then Ted Cruz was interrupting Bernie like immediately back, and Bernie says, "Don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting you." And it was just funny. It was keeping it lighthearted. I don't know. What was your take on the overall image of the debate?
So not going into the details of the aspects of the debate, I did also enjoy the banter. I think it's good just because with our nation currently being so divided on so many issues, and we don't really see the civility in the world currently as far as between, somebody of a different ideology. It's nice to see two people that are complete opposite be able to talk to each other. And, it still is a civil conversation. Even when one's trying to one up the other, it's still lighthearted in the aspect that the intentions seem to be for the betterment of the citizens. Granted, completely different aspects on how they do it, but I did find it very enjoyable. So I'm not, and like I said, I'm not opposed to Bernie. As far as I think I like Bernie because he's like a classic Democrat in the sense that he's no different than the 1970s and 80s like liberals that used to protest and everything. Anyways, he talks economic warfare, and I like that. The ones I don't like are going to be the Barack Obamas that are about ideology because that's the new stuff.
Right. All right. So if you had to give your bumper sticker or your postcard for what you want this episode to revolve around besides the debate, but the one sticking point.
If we were going to title this episode, I would say compare and contrast socialism to free markets and why liberalism is killing itself.
Okay. So can you give me then the 3 points during that debate where the socialism aspect of Bernie Sanders came out?
Oh, easily. So what Bernie is pitching in the end is he wants big government as far as he thinks that instead of the top tier, those that are going to pay the highest tax rate currently, instead of them being in control of their money, he wants to take more of their money and he wants to give it to Washington, and he wants Washington to divvy out where the money goes. And so that's number one. That increases the size of the actual government bureaucracy, which is by far anti-American. All right. Number two, he tells us that Washington is corrupt, which already contradicts his first aspect to it, which is why would we give money or power to somebody that you already believe is corrupt?
Good point.
And then number three, and I think this is the biggest thing, when the top 1/10 of a percentile can't pay all the debt that he would like to compile, who's going to pay the rest? Because at the end of the day, the debt collector, the bill collector does come for you. And what will end up happening is it is the middle class, it is the actual primary taxpayer that will foot the bill. And there's so many deeper implications to that.
Okay. So let me potentially go down a list that I found of 8 times that Bernie Sanders apparently demolished Ted Cruz.
Which website is this from?
Well, this is from the greatest website in the world called Salon.com.
I mean, I can't think of a more reputable website to get my politics from. Let's go.
Oh, right, yeah. So the irony in this is that I'm trying to use a website that thinks Bernie Sanders won to use their points to bring to you that you will then destroy.
Let's do it.
All right. In no particular order, let's go with the tax structure in Scandinavia. And this is a good one because I actually watched this part of the debate. So I'm curious of where this is going to go. So this is all a quote from Bernie Sanders then that was done during the debate.
Okay.
So I quote, second point that I want to make, Ted, you said earlier, 2 points that I want to make here. Number one, we can have a debate about whether you like what's going on in Denmark or not. Don't compare Denmark to Cuba. Don't compare Denmark to communist countries. Denmark has a higher voter turnout rate than we do. They're a vigorous democracy, as are other Scandinavian countries. They're obviously trying to make the case that this website is that when Ted Cruz was in that debate and he started referencing that they do have a higher tax structure, higher taxes, period, and that everybody pays into it, right? And then where are the I'll say Scandinavians or the Swedes, are they coming to America? Kind of the implication is that they're not. So clearly something must be working there. And that's then what it sounded like Bernie Sanders was trying to state is that don't compare these. I'm trying to think of what that part of the world is called right now.
The Baltics?
Sure. What the Baltic states are, don't compare them to communist countries.
Okay.
So,
I'd love to talk that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's definitely comparing apples to oranges when we talk about the American tax code and sort of a welfare state that we have in America, like a growing welfare state in comparison to like Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the Baltics period. So you have Denmark. Denmark's population is about 5.7 million total, right? So Denmark's population is less than California. Denmark's population is less than at least the 9 or 10 major states in the United States, right? Extremely small.
Yeah.
The other aspect is to go along with that 5.7 million people that live in Denmark, they have an unemployment rate of 5.7. For a healthy economy, the unemployment rate needs to be somewhere between 5 and 8. So what it is because so few people, based on that 5.7 percentage, you're talking such a small amount of people that require social welfare that it is easy when you have a high working class, like a high amount of people that do work, to supply a welfare state like that, right? It wouldn't work in America because we have 323 million people, and even though our unemployment rate is at 5%, that's such a larger number at 5% as far as the amount of people that would be required. And the other aspect that you have to look at is these Baltic states already naturally are inherently socialist. Like they've always had extremely high tax codes. And when he says don't compare the Baltics to a communist state, really there's no better comparison to communism than to socialism, right? Ideally, socialism's a little bit more efficient than communism. Communism's like the ultimate wasted product because you have central planning done by the oligarchs that will take the money from the top, and they give very little out to the people. Socialism's very similar to that. It's maybe a little bit more fair, but like when he brings up political participation, saying that they have a high voter turnout, that doesn't mean that their voting class actually has a true say on how things go. And so there is a large chunk of the world where there is higher political participation than in, say, like America or the UK, but that does not mean that they have the same influence on their economy or the same influence on their government that you would have in like the UK or America.
Yeah, to play devil's advocate, if you don't mind, when you mention that, yes, they have a higher voter turnout, but they're not really able to make any changes, isn't that somewhat similar to how our popular vote versus like the electoral college vote works? Not just with the presidency, but that we, the people, aren't making laws. It's your governors and then your congressmen and the senators that end up pushing these laws. And we don't necessarily see, especially in the House.
Yep.
We don't see anything until it's already coming up for a vote, yay or nay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm just curious as to if you could explain that
Easy.
to me and the listeners.
Easy. So for like Denmark or the Baltic states period, they do not run in what's called federalism or like a federation, right? So they're their own individual state. They don't really have like local regional governments, right? In America, we have locality government. So you have your cities, you have your counties, and you have your state before you ever touch your federal government. So for us, 80% of the laws that we prescribe to as citizens are actually done by the local county. Like, so it's either city, county, or state. 80% of the laws that pertain to us are done actually at a lower level. And in that perspective, we do have a say because we do popularly vote in our local representatives. That's not done by an electoral system, but at the state level, it's done pure popular vote. So you do have a say on a majority, literally a heavy majority of what laws are in place. For the 20% of laws that are basically federally ran to include like obviously the protections under the Bill of Rights after the 14th Amendment was in place, we do have federalism and as far as republicanism that allows us to vote. So for the House of Representatives, we do elect on a popular vote for the House. We vote in our district for our district representative, and then that individual represents us at Washington, right?
Hopefully.
And so ideally that's how that works. Prior to 1917, the Senate used to actually be different than even that, right? The Senate's job prior was your two senators were selected by the state legislatures. So we used to popularly vote in the state legislator, and then our state legislature would then vote to see who they wanted the two senators to be. And the reason that is the House was meant to be a popular House. So the House was supposed to represent individualism, while like the Senate was supposed to be deliberate.
Yeah.
And the Senate was supposed to represent the state as a whole. And that was supposed to put a check on the federal Congress, right? Because at that point, if the senators didn't vote the way that states wanted them to vote, you could recall a senator back then. After 1917, you see the 17th Amendment being ratified, and the 17th Amendment being ratified basically made it where the Senate was now popular vote by the state as well too. So the only time electoral college comes into play is the actual president, right?
Yeah.
And then everything else is actually truly a popular vote at this point. And there's a reason that we don't allow the executive to be a popular vote. If you ran it off a popular vote, you would allow the 8 major cities of the United States to determine every presidency from this point on.
Okay, what I just learned out of that explanation is that I need to be very more specific with my questions.
Okay.
Because that was so well thought out that you started losing me there. But it was good. Like, I mean, it was good. But the reason I say that is I want to make sure that we still try to stay focused around the debate.
For sure.
That was my bad for asking a question that was going to go into a elaborate answer.
Okay. So I guess to elaborate or just to answer your question, they can have they in the Baltics or they in any socialist participatory democracy can have more of a say on a popular vote, but it does not impact the same way as like in America, right? Because our constitution, our federal constitution, is consented by the people, right? And we understand that if we do not like the way things are running in Congress, we can elect other people to Congress. If we do not like how the president does his or her job, we can elect a new president every 4 years. And ideally, if a president in his second year is doing an awful job, and we think that he's violated what his job is as the president, we can elect in the midterm a new Congress to hopefully try to impeach.
Like they're trying to do with Trump right now.
Yeah, it's a little different, though.
Yeah. All right. Bernie Sanders then went on to, and I quote during the debate, "Let's examine what Senator Cruz really wants to do. He wants to see legislation passed that would give $1.9 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%, significantly increase the national debt being passed on to our kids and our grandchildren. And in order to pay for these tax breaks for billionaires, he wants to throw 15 million people off of Medicaid, cut Medicare by over $450 billion, cut Pell Grants, cut programs like the WIC program, which is the Women, Infant, and Children program, which is designed for low-income pregnant women and their little babies, end quote. The normal ploy here from the left is always that the Republicans only want tax breaks for the wealthiest. That's what they always use here, and that's exactly what I think Bernie Sanders said, tried to make the case in that quote. And so the question for you is two-part question. One, do you think that Republicans are only looking out for the 1%, or let's just say the top 10%? And two, if that is not the case, what are they trying to do?
So the answer to your first question is yes. They are looking out for the 1% or the 10%, but that's not a simple, these are the bad guys. So Ted Cruz was directly accurate on the facts when he stated that 2/3 of the U.S. jobs actually come from small business. So for those of you that are listening, if you're from a major city, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, because major cities are dominated by very large companies, right? And so you assume everybody works at Walmart, you assume everybody works at McDonald's, you assume everybody works at some sort of big corporation. But the truth is, in America, roughly 2/3 of the jobs actually do come from mom and pop shops or chains and franchises that don't exceed past the state size, right? Like they're only within the state. And so those provide most of the middle class jobs, because it's not the corporations that are going to plug people into being, like true middle class, like 100, 120,000, 130,000 a year jobs are not going to be done by them, but it's going to be done by like the communication companies. It's going to be done by the local energy companies in Colorado and Texas, etc. Those are middle class jobs. But the company themselves are a part of the 1% that Bernie talks about, which I think is probably closer to a 10 percentile number, right?
Right.
And so that's why when he's arguing that they're making tax cuts to the rich, their rich friends, for one, he's talking about corporate tax rate, right? So it's not like he's looking at like literally a business owner. He's not looking at the individual, right? He's looking at the business. And the corporate tax rate in America is at a true rate of 39, but at what an effective rate would be of like 27. And so Bernie Sanders quoted the effective tax rate was actually at like 22, which would put them in the middle. But that's not an accurate number. It's more like 27. And that 20%, that 27 percentile, the tax rate, is based on the fact that a lot of major companies are able to offshore a lot of their money, so it's not accounted for the same way. And so they do pay less in taxes. But most companies, especially the small businesses, they don't have the ability to actually offshore. So what you're doing is 2/3 of the companies that supply jobs in America are paying the high 39% tax rate. And then the wealthy corporations that everybody hates are actually the ones that pay the 27 or 22 percentile.
All right, so saying yes to the first question, which is, are they only looking out for the top 1 of the top 10%, then essentially nullifies my question number 2, which was, if they're not doing that, who are they trying to give are they trying to give tax breaks or tax cuts to anybody else?
Oh, they're giving it to everybody.
Okay, so I think because that's probably where the majority of our listeners are, then the Republicans usually want to give tax breaks for everybody, because the Republicans' values are that no matter who you are, 1% or top 1% or the bottom 50% is everybody should have an equal right to any dollar that they earn.
Correct. So yeah, I mean that's the American way. Limited government. You earn your money. You spend your money, and the economy flourishes on people spending money.
Yeah. So the quote then is somewhat misleading, because while there is truth to giving a tax break to the top 1%, you're going to have to figure out A, where the money is coming from to pay for that. Mm-hmm. But then B, what Bernie Sanders is not saying is that, oh, by the way, everybody else will also be getting a tax break.
Correct. And I think there was a truck driver from Pennsylvania that highlighted that question to Bernie Sanders. And what ended up happening is Bernie Sanders laughed, sort of smiled, and then shrugged off the question because,
Typical.
well, yeah, I mean, basically, what we have to understand is, and it's not just Bernie, right? Like, I mean, Ted Cruz did that too. The problem is these politicians are presenting this one idea when really there's more to it than that, right?
Yeah.
Like Bernie Sanders says trickle-down economics didn't work in the 80s. It didn't work in '04 is what he's saying. And when he's saying trickle-down, he's saying the idea that if you give tax breaks to the companies, that jobs, he does not believe that it will articulate to money back into the economy or jobs being made. And he says it didn't work, which you could debate either way, but I think most statistics would show the economy actually grew from trickle-down economics in the 80s. And we can get into that after. But what ends up happening is when the truck driver was like, hey, I get that they're giving a tax break to the 1%, right? And we can continue calling it the 1%, but let's just call it small business and large business.
Okay.
You're giving it to these corporations and these businesses. Bernie Sanders says, what about the regular person? But if you look at the tax plan, a simplified code makes it where you and I do not have to actually pay for somebody to file our taxes anymore. And also the fact that you're giving a tax break to the middle class and you will not be taxing poverty level at all. It ends up being a tax break for everybody. And that's sort of what the truck driver highlighted. And Bernie Sanders is like, well, I can't, within my good conscience, support this because it gives too much of a break to the 1%. You know, and then he's like, oh, it's going to, you know, what's going to happen to the $1.9 trillion that's not being collected? Because the tax breaks, they say will be about 1.9 trillion not collected in tax revenue based on tax rate, right? And I think most people are trying to respond saying we would make that up from sales tax and other taxes from the economy flourishing.
Ted Cruz said this at the debate that what he's for a flat tax, I believe with 10%, and then I think a corporation of 17 somewhere.
I think he said 17. Yeah.
He's not president.
Yep.
So, do you think that he would be in favor of I'll say Trump's plan, right, of going down to 3 tax brackets, you know, lowering what the corporation tax or the high, you know, down to what I say he said no more than.
Well, Trump threw out the number 15. But the truth is, like, effectively, it would probably be 20. The House of Representatives and the Senate will never approve anything that's less than 20.
Yeah. So do you think that then Cruz and the Republican Party will go for that, or are you going to have individuals filibustering that, such as a John McCain or whoever it may be? I mean, we could pretty much probably presume that every Democrat's going to say no. So that's 48.
I actually don't think every Democrat will say no. So tax reform is a really tricky thing. You know, like John Adams said that, and I think Ted Cruz quoted it. The facts can be, you know, very tricky or something of that nature. Basically, like they don't always work in your favor. But the thing is like it's hard to deny the fact that when you run and you tell the people that you support the working class, and when somebody says, "Hey, I'm willing to give this to the working class," like I'm willing to give them what they've earned back, right? Not even a free handout. They've earned this money, and we want them to have more of it. It's really hard for a lot of these moderate Democrats, some of the ones from the Midwest, you know, like the 3 Colorado representatives from the House. In the Senate, I mean, there's 2 or 3 Senate Democrats that are considered moderate based on their states. It's really hard for them to say no to a tax break that's going to benefit a majority of their constituents. So I actually think Trump will probably pick off from the Senate of probably about 2 or 3 Democrats is what he'll gain with the tax reform. I think he'll lose probably Susan Collins of Maine just because she's showing to be a pain in the ass.
So trying to just stick big picture wise, do you think that we will get tax reform?
I do.
And all right, and quickly, what in 1 minute or less, what do you think it would look like? As in the 3
the actual bill. So they'll have 3 brackets, and then they'll have 1 corporate tax rate. I think the corporate tax rate they'll probably just even out at 22%, so it allows small businesses to compete with large business, right?
Okay.
So just even it out at 22%. I assume they will go not to a flat tax, but they will have a 3-tiered system. So if you're considered poverty level, you probably won't pay any taxes at all. If you're middle class, you'll probably be around 12%, which is a small break right now. The middle class pays between 14 and 15%, and then upper class right now will probably get knocked down to about 18 percentile.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where we are filling this out on a postcard, or no?
No, I think that's a little naive. And I think the IRS being a government agency will never be that efficient for us just to put it on a postcard. I think the Republicans can want that, but the only way that's going to happen is if you actually shut down the IRS, which I wouldn't be opposed to that either. Government agency is the closest thing to like immortality. Like, it's the closest thing we're going to get on Earth.
Yeah.
So I would say if we can knock the IRS out, we could save a lot of money there, and maybe we could go to like a postcard system. But for now, I think they'll just simplify it, and we'll just have an online system.
And and for everybody listening, the postcard system that I'm talking about is in reference to the alternative to your 1040 EZ, what you normally would fill out for your taxes. But hopefully, everybody is already utilizing some sort of online program because they're amazing and they're so simple. So. But all right, I want to give you one more from Bernie Sanders before we move on potentially to maybe some things that Ted Cruz said, and then we'll get into how socialism.
More of the general stuff.
This is kind of a big one for me because a lot of the left likes to talk about this. So hopefully we won't go too far off on a tangent when you hear the quote.
Just reel me back in.
I'll try. Bernie Sanders then stated to Ted Cruz, and I quote, "I happen to believe that if you want to really get the economy moving, you do things like raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, put money into the hands of working people, provide targeted tax breaks to small businesses and working people, rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, creating 15 million jobs. I'll let you tackle that however you want."
Okay.
What I obviously am focused on for myself, what I normally get into debates with is anybody that thinks that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is out of their minds, and you're not going to be creating jobs. You're going to be losing jobs. But you're here. This is why I want you. You're my expert, man. So talk to me.
Okay, so let me say what I can't agree with, right?
Okay.
I do agree with Bernie Sanders that if we could, and this is not simplifying the tax code, right? So if I'm in support of simplifying the tax code, I don't think this works. But if I thought that we could make certain tax regulation or tax rules that would target small business as far as giving them the benefit or the edge over a large corporation, I would be in support of that, right? Large businesses naturally just in their nature have more dominance, and they're able to use their revenue to beat out small business. That's just the nature of the economic market right now. So if there was a way for us to incentivize Americans to becoming their own business owners, I would absolutely be for that. The problem is it's not it's a very tricky item. It's very complex, and the biggest thing is it increases the size of the government tremendously, because you have to have now an agency or an entity that monitors whatever these said regulations are to ensure that they're being done correctly, right? Yeah. So the idea is a great intent, but it can never actually be done properly. Not to mention when you have an agency that targets a particular group, what ends up happening is now you're gonna see lawsuits from the large corporations saying that they're being mistreated in the aspect of the way our economic system's set up. As far as the minimum wage, I think Bernie Sanders is literally beating a dead horse here. And the problem is you have a state like California buying into it. You know, by 2022, California will have a $15 an hour minimum wage, basically a living wage. And the problem is like the minimum wage made sense back in the 1930s, right? Because you hit the secondary industrial revolution, and you needed standards set not only with economic, like as far as what somebody's time and effort should be paid out, but also like their standard of work, like where are they working, what kind of conditions they're working in. In the case of $15 an hour, that's idiotic at best. Let's go small. Let's look at a micro of it, right? Yeah. California has both Central Valley, which is blue collar, and then they have the Bay Area, which is considered the white collar, right? In the Bay Area, the middle class income in the Bay Area, so that means you are middle class, it's roughly around $23 an hour, right? So if you want to live in San Francisco, your minimum needs to be about 15, right? 15, 16 just to function in a small apartment with roommates. It's not that way in the Central Valley. So you have like Visalia and Fresno. The median income in Fresno and Visalia is $15. So the problem is your middle class in the Central Valley of California has a median wage of 15. That puts the minimum wage there around $10 an hour, right? Yeah. And then you have San Francisco where the median is around 23 and the minimum is around 15. If you increase the whole state's minimum wage to 15, you are going to destroy most of the businesses in the Central Valley. You will at least at minimum stunt the growth. Because if a business can't pay their baseline workers what they're paying their minimum or their middle class workers, you're literally going to have companies closing their doors. Because the first 10 years the company's open, they're only at 3 to 6% in the black, right?
Yeah.
So now you're taking their profit and you're saying, hey, I want you to keep your doors open, but I only want you to make 1% after you've paid all your bills. What business owner that puts in 50 or 60 hours a week is going to do that? None.
Right, yeah. Why would you?
You wouldn't. It decentivizes people. What it does is it decentivizes you having freedoms, like economic freedoms, but it does put you at the need of the state. And so what ends up happening is the state or the federal government now become something you are reliant on. And that's exactly what the socialist groups want. They want you reliant on the government.
All right, that well put. That's why I wanted you to answer it. So, leading in towards where we think that the left is going in the Democratic Party, why I personally think that Ted Cruz probably just outmatched Bernie Sanders in that debate. I'm not talking on policies, just right. I mean, how they presented
just
themselves.
Structure of the debate.
Structure, yes. But what Cruz asked Sanders, he asked, since this is a tax debate, what is the difference between a socialist and a Democrat on taxes? And Sanders said, I don't know. And he said it with such, what word am I looking for?
Truth?
Here. Yeah, such truth. And he was very pointed about it, right? No hesitation, just, I don't know. That, first off, deep down, I believe that Sanders does know the difference. Mm-hmm. But he does not want to state it because that's going to expose where he wants to take everything. But I think that's what I wanted to bring that. Why I wanted to bring that in is that was a good transitioning piece on where, again, I thought Cruz owned Sanders at that moment. Mm-hmm. But that leads us into why is the left getting away from their traditional values of big government, right? Trying to make a safer world into going straight to socialism with the likes of Bernie Sanders. I'm trying to think, Warren.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama. I think was kind of the start of it, right? I mean, he was kind of a cloak, that.
Yeah, and in 2008, that's when they made the shift. Right, and I think actually for them, I don't want to go too in depth because obviously it would take hours, just from a political research standpoint. But I think what Barack Obama did is he used identity politics, which is a new form of politics from what's called the New Left, and I'll talk about the New Left in a moment. But he used identity politics to win himself the presidency, right? Which was great for Barack Obama, but it was not great for the Democratic Party because the demographics in the United States still don't quite support that identity politics. If they'd have did this about 12 years from now, I think you would have seen a strong effect of identity politics, and I think the left would have dominated the political spectrum. But we're still not there demographically, so America is not responding well to the political identity issues that are currently being played.
Agreed.
So the big thing to understand, and I think this is now less about the debate and more about just at the core, you have a lot of these Democrats that are blindly supporting Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is at their core, they have their own contradictions now, right? Because Bernie Sanders does not support identity politics. What he does support is he supports economic warfare. So Bernie Sanders represents actually the Marxist movement of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That is Bernie Sanders. He is what I would call the old New Left, and then Barack Obama and Elizabeth Warren represent the new, like the New Left, right? Like the newest left. But the old New Left was, I'm going to use Marxism, which is the Communist Manifesto, to play class warfare, where I'm going to fight against the middle class because that's what they call for in the Communist Manifesto, so that eventually those in poverty will topple those on top, right? And that's
Yeah.
what the Democrats aimed at in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it didn't work. It did not work because that's when America shifted back to the right. And now, in 2008 and on, you're seeing a bigger shift with the new left, the European left, which is identity politics. How can we use tribalism at the human core, right? Human nature at its core, when everything breaks down, what makes us different, and how can we use that to exploit? That is the new Democratic Party. And the Democrats of the 1950s, the 1960s, they eventually came over to the Republican Party now. And people don't understand that. People don't understand, like, I often hear they're like, oh, yeah, you know, Lincoln's party, Lincoln's Republicans ended up becoming the Democrats, and then the racist Democrats became Republicans. That's like the simplest, stupidest form.
Did you say the racist? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like literally like the Dixiecrats, right?
Okay.
So like when people are like, oh, the Dixiecrats moved over and they became Republicans, it was a shift. It was a, you know, like a new alignment. That's not accurate, okay? It's not accurate because it's oversimplistic. That's a 10-year-old looking at it and saying that's what happened. What it comes down to is prior to the 1960s and 70s, the left and the right really weren't that different, right? That like at all. And you can go back to our founding, right? If you look at who currently would represent the Democratic Party, you would say Hamilton. Obviously, the original founders, Thomas Jefferson founded the Democratic Party. Andrew Jackson literally launched them into what was called democratic populism. Jefferson and Jackson would never recognize the Democrats of today. But Jefferson and Jackson, their following group is now the Republican Party. And it's not based on racism or anything of that nature. What it is Jefferson supported people having freedoms, right? He supported us being able to make decisions as human beings.
Right.
And those were endowed by God. All the laws that we have in the Bill of Rights and anything beyond, endowed by God. Jackson used democratic populism, which Trump is a populist. Trump is literally a modern Jackson. And his supporters, the Jacksonians, are the ones that actually are in the military. Jacksonians are the ones that fly the flag in front of their house. They're the ones that are upset that people are not standing for the flag because they're patriots, right?
Right.
What you have is you have the blue-collar poor whites that have shifted over to the Republican Party, and what's now happened is you have the new left, the European left, these European ideologies coming over, and they are now in charge. The postmodernists are in charge of the Democratic Party, and what they're doing is they're looking at blacks, they're looking at Asians, and they're looking at Mexicans, and they're saying, hey, here's everything that's different about us, and this is why you have to support us and not them. And they yell, they scream, they want us protesting. But the problem is that what they truly want is they don't want the truth told to these minorities. Because if minorities know how much they actually have in common if they're given freedom, they're not buying the democratic bullshit. They're coming to the right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, and then I'll let you kind of take this into the summary of the show, if you will.
Sure.
But when you have the socialism, right, class of individuals and the younger members of society today that align with that,
Millennials.
correct, they want their freedoms, right, but yet they want the government obviously to also be involved, right? So what I'm curious about is how does that work? What can you say to them to explain to them that is just asinine? And my example would be is that you have law enforcement, which is arguably a governmental entity, right? At least at state level.
Yeah, it's still a form of government.
Right, that they clearly are losing their fucking shit on right now. So if you can't even expect then a city, county, governmental agency to help you and save you and not have brutality and racism, how the hell are you going to expect then the larger government to not fall into that trap?
Yeah.
So was my question clear?
It is. So I think really at the core, this is the big debate though, right? Like a lot of millennials will claim that they support like libertarianism, for instance, right? Give me my freedom, I want my freedom. That's not what these millennials want. So for one, they're lying to themselves, or somebody's lied to them and tried to explain libertarianism, and they went over their head. right?
Bastards.
So these millennials don't want freedom. What they want is they hate authority unless it's the authority that they put in place. And what they want is they want to feel like they're protected to say what they want, but they don't want you to be able to say what you want, right? And that is not true freedom. That's literally the exact opposite of that. That is utilitarianism. So like at the core, if you believe in true republicanism, democracy, etc., freedom, you believe freedom is just a God-given ability, right? They believe whatever is given by the state, and whatever is taken by the state. And they support the state when it's convenient and free for them. When it's not convenient, when it's not free, when it's not an authority that they deem to be legit, they start crying because they want to feel protected by somebody else. So what can we say to them? There's three things. For one, naturally youthful people, because you're being influenced by these teachers. Yeah. Teachers are naturally on the left, right? You're being influenced by the media and the TV, which is naturally on the left. You're being influenced by writers. Writers mostly are naturally on the left, right?
Yeah.
Every single piece of their influence in America now is coming from the left. The only thing you can do, right, especially if you're a parent and you're center right, or you just have a basic common sense and you don't buy into every little item that these left elitists tell you, is you can tell them the alternative to what they're hearing. You can explain to them that, hey, things may seem difficult right now because you're a millennial and you're young, but eventually you need to find a job. And what happens is you find out that the money you thought you were going to make, you're not going to make, because all the programs that you bought into and you voted on, it's now taken away money that you would have had once you started working. The quickest way to change somebody from being on the left to going to the right is when they get a job and they look at their tax, like the tax code, and they're like, oh my God, where's all my money going? That's the quickest way that somebody starts opening their eyes and they don't believe the propaganda anymore. Outside of that, you can simply explain to them, like, hey, here's what you can do if you're given the freedoms, and here's why it's important that everybody has a voice, etc.
Yeah, what would you say to somebody, final question, what would you say to somebody, though, that would make the argument that, yes, where did my money go to this, to the taxes? However, could they not bring up the argument that if you lowered the cost for, as Bernie Sanders said in the debate, child health care, I'm sorry, not child health care, sending your kid to preschool or like a development center.
Price controls.
Right, yeah. If that price went down, then they wouldn't be so concerned with that their taxes, are X amount of dollars because other things went down around the system and the government. So what do you say to that?
Well, for one, it's not free market capitalism, right? So at the core of what Bernie's saying, Bernie is literally pitching socialism and communism to all of us. Because what he's telling you is that the government should have the right to set price controls. And the American government did this in the 1960s, in the 1950s. It's called Keynesian economics. The problem with Keynesian economics is you assume that the government will make up the difference. The government's willing to spend the money to sort of get the economy rolling. But eventually that debt just continues to compile. And what you end up getting is you end up either getting hyperinflation or you have a wasted currency as far as the currency no longer meaning anything. So with Bernie Sanders' option, either A, you're going to see a decline in the quality of childcare or a decline in the quality of teachers, right? Because you're already seeing that now with teachers being underpaid. You're not getting the best you can, right?
I agree.
And so if you're setting a price and you're saying, hey, here's the most somebody can pay for childcare, why would you, as somebody coming out of college, want to even be in the childcare system? What would promote you to stick around and care for children, right? Or B, say he says, well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to create some sort of entitlement program, some sort of subsidy so that, you can get a tax credit and you can use that tax money to hopefully put your kids into like a daycare, etc. The problem with that is you now increase the tax code again. You're making more money come out of the working class to pay for childcare. And what if you're not somebody that has a child yet? Like, why should you have to pay that? Why is the answer for most of these socialist Democrats to increase taxes? So either he has to answer the question, is he trying to increase the taxes on the middle class? Or, because he's going to claim it's the 1% that he's increasing, but it'll be the middle class. Or is he saying that he wants to get in and he wants to start regulating the free market? Because every time the free market's regulated, it causes drama, it causes issues.
Okay. I think that was very well put. I think we could probably wrap this up. I think that was a good overall recap of the points of the debate.
Yeah.
Where things stood. I do not know when the next debate night in America is. I tried to do a quick just look up, but I couldn't find anything on it. But just look, towards CNN or Fox News, right? One of them. Granted, this debate night in America series is on CNN, but watch it. Learn the topics that they're discussing. Do the research. Figure out where everybody stands and where the truth is, and just know that who's ever on the left is going to lie to you. Whoever on the right is going to lie to you less. Mm-hmm. And so you need to just figure out what is the best course of action as a whole. Yep. Right? And not only for yourself, but for the United States of America. I'll go ahead and say my piece, and I'll let you actually wrap up the show.
Okay.
So again, this was Thomas John for Your Views and My Facts, the podcast. Find our Facebook page at Views and Facts. Jump on with our advertiser, Lasting Lips by Lan. Buy some products. You can get skincare products. Lipstick is primarily what they're known for. Some good stuff. Blah blah blah. It's great because anytime that a woman comes in here and puts then her lips on my microphones, the lipstick doesn't come off. Great stuff. It won't come off on glasses. Or
is it a real
real
microphone, or was that an analogy for something else?
A real microphone.
Okay.
But it could also be with an analogy, a metaphor. I'll let the listeners figure that one out. So, yeah, find us on there. Leave us a comment, like, subscribe to the show. The last thing that I would say is just my little educational tip for everybody is Rich had talked about white-collar workers and blue-collar workers. I feel like there's probably still people that don't exactly know what that means. So my education piece before I hand it over to Rich to close out the show is that a blue-collar worker typically was wearing blue coveralls and they were on the ground floor to that way if they got any grease or any type of smudges on them, didn't really make a difference. Whereas your white-collar worker was wearing your actual white button-down shirt with a tie, and so if they got anything dirty on them, then you could easily see it. So that is what they mean by a white-collar worker is normally your CEO-type individuals, and your blue-collar worker are the grunts, the ones that are actually doing the hard work. They're the ones that are making America continue to turn and revolve and so forth. So that's me. That's Thomas John. Rich, go ahead, close it out.
All right. So I'm just going to leave on these few points. When we founded our Constitution on representation, we founded it on separation of powers, and we founded it on limited government. What you hear from the left, when you hear from like a socialist like Bernie Sanders, what he's pitching is representation, but what he's not telling you is in the process of ballooning the government in size, he's knocking down a separation of powers, and he's also ensuring that the government is not limited. Completely against the core of what this nation stands for. And these are European politics that have bled into America, right? Especially after World War II. Important thing to know, right? Just think about this. Have you ever been given a job by a poor person? My guess is probably not, right? So the people that are creating jobs are going to be the wealthy. And let's just roll with the idea that all money was redistributed evenly to every single American. All 323 of us had the same amount of money. You leveled everything out. I promise you, 80 to 90% of the top 1% will become the top 1% again. 80% of those in poverty will again be in poverty. And there will be a small percentage of us that are in the middle class that will finally get our break to be upper class, but most of us will still be middle class. Why is that? The upper class individuals are educated and they know how to run a business. They know how to handle money. The poverty people, the ones that want to redistribute the money, they're just going to waste their money in the process. Does that mean that we shouldn't help them out? No, it doesn't. But that does not mean the only way to help them out is to give money to Washington. There's charitable options, right? Donate to your church. Go out and serve for your church. If you're not even religious, go out and help somebody in need. Go to a soup kitchen. Go to some sort of homeless shelter. Give them aid if that's what you want to do. But the beauty is you're doing that on your own choice. right? America used to run on that. In the 1920s, people thought poverty had disappeared in America, and we did not have an income tax. So don't tell me that poverty can only be fixed by increasing taxes, because that's not true. What it is we've gone away from what we know is true to adopt these new ideologies. And it would amaze me, it would amaze everybody if they could go back and they could see what the original idea of hard work and dedication would give them.
All right, Rich, thank you for being one of our Vipers, and thank you all for listening in. Coming up with a few of our episodes, we'll be having another discussion about the flag and the national anthem within politics, as well as we've got a interview that we recently did with Rich, one-on-one, that we will also get out there for you. So stay tuned. Again, subscribe to the podcast, and we will entertain you again in one more week. Take care.